Welcome everyone to a very special and a little different XpoNorth digital short today. We have a very special guest. I and many people around me are very excited to have him here. We have Iain Clark, who's the drummer for both Uriah Heep, very cool, and Cressida, and also a founder of a fund now for a co-founder for young musicians. Hello, Iain.
Hello.
From my lockdown to your lockdown, we're very excited to have you here.
Pleasure.
Now, Iain, can you tell us a little bit first about who you are and what you do?
All right. Well, you've already introduced me. I think I would just add that I was the former drummer because Heep, believe it or not, is still actually going, although not playing now, as a result of all the restrictions. Um, I I don't know what to say. I was a professional musician for several years. Prior to that, I was a school teacher. I came out of that. I didn't want to. I left the music business because I felt that I was in there to have fun rather than make a career out of it. I was more interested in working with young people. And over the next 10, 15 years, I got involved in working with young people in youth centres. I set up charities. I moved to the Highlands 30 years ago, set up a charitable organisation for unemployed youngsters, then went into if you like, community development and software development, and got involved with a lot of European research projects. And I worked closely with HIDB, as it was in those days, until I went back to my own company and retired about 15 years ago. So
congratulations. That's amazing. And I think, I don't know if you would agree with this metaphor, but if you were a drummer for these bands, you're the support, you're the thing that keeps the beat. And now you can translate that to the support you do with these companies and these charities you create.
yes, I mean, timing is very important.
It
Even
is.
with funds like this, yes,
Well,
absolutely.
can you tell us about this latest fund that we're here to talk about?
Okay. Well, the Liam Colgan Music Fund basically has just been formally registered as a charity, although discussions about setting up the fund started over a year ago as a result of publicity that was attracted to a really tragic story of young Liam Colgan, who disappeared whilst attending his brother's stag weekend in Hamburg. I've been a friend of his father's for many years and worked with quite closely with Brian on various projects. And like a lot of people, I was completely devastated by really the appalling tragedy, because he went missing and wasn't found for nearly 2 months. And there was a huge amount of reaction from both people here who went out to Hamburg to look for him, and a core group of about 20 odd local people in Hamburg who were involved in searching for him. Sadly, it was to no avail, and his body was recovered. And clearly a devastating experience for his friends and close family. As a musician, I've never really stopped playing. Well, I hung up my stick, so to speak, about 2 years ago now. One of the last things I did with the band that I was in, called Twisted Blues, which was a three-piece local band, was that we went to New Orleans to record an album, and made that album. It wasn't really being made for public release, but my colleague in the band, Roger Niven, who's a fellow trustee of the fund, approached me and said, should we not donate the album we recorded to the fund itself? And I immediately agreed. And as a result of that, I found myself getting inveigled into becoming a trustee of the fund.
That's wonderful.
And because I've set up various other organizations such as this in the past, I was drawn to doing quite a lot of the legwork to get it started.
Iain, can I ask, what, if you were going to name it in a sentence or two, what is the aim of the fund? What is at the heart of it?
At the heart of it is to provide support for young musicians, both those that are looking to make a career in music and those that just want to develop their own skills and progress as musicians. particularly across the Highlands and Islands, where youngsters are not as blessed, if you like, with getting access to some of the resources that is available in some of the larger cities, certainly the Central Belt and obviously the major cities. So the idea of the fund really was to provide that sort of support, really in memory of Liam, who was a young musician, got his degree at UHI, and so forth. So, that's really the background to it.
So we're going to come back to the fund and what's happening with it now, because I know there's a launch soon and how we can get involved a little bit. But first, speaking about young musicians, I was wondering if we could rewind time and put yourself back in the shoes of a young musician and tell us a little bit about what life was like for you. Was it very difficult to be a young musician and starting out? Did you get your gigs right away? How did you find your way to Uriah Heep?
A lot of luck, I think, is the immediate answer to that. As I said, I'd been originally a school teacher, but I'd learned to play the drums, and I was doing it in really my spare time. When I went off to university and college, I got involved with the band there, and then moved to London, taught for a year, and thought, no, I would like to get out and see whether I can actually cut it in the music business. And like so many countless other musicians of that era, this would have been 1969, 1970, starved for a year. If you were lucky, you'd get into a band. If you had talent, then hopefully someone would spot you, and that would then lead to gigs and so on and so forth. I was in a band called Cressida before then, and then moved on after Cressida split up to join Uriah Heep. I think one of the things more than anything that I've come to appreciate 50 years later is that a number of things that were just day-to-day activities were just the things that you were doing in the course of your life. 50 years later, you look back upon and realizing they actually were quite significant, and in some cases had a sort of a historical a bent to them. And but at the time, you were just a young musician making your way in the world.
Can you give us an example? Because this is the second time the theme of timing comes up. So being either in the right place at the right time, or doing the thing that it started leading you on a different path.
Well, yes. I suppose I've always been very dedicated to achieving whatever goals I've set myself. Clearly, Cressida were not a band that was particularly well known. It was 45 years later that the band reformed, really almost by demand, and we did a reunion gig in London, which attracted fans from all over the world: Brazil, Russia, Japan, because it turned out that over that intervening period, Cressida had become really something of a cult. No one knew what happened to them, and we were one of the early progressive bands of that era. So that's sort of one example of how things have changed. Back then, to repeat what I was saying about the fact that you just did things that he had no idea about, and I was very fortunate to meet some very significant figures in the rock music history.
Can you name a few?
Well, I suppose the one story I tend to dine out on more than anything else was the day that Jimi Hendrix made me a cup of tea. I was working in Oxford Street at a music publisher's there, and one of the people in the office said, "Look, you live in South Kensington, don't you? Could you deliver this package?" And so I said, "Yes, I'll take it on my way home." So on my way home, I went to this address. It was one of those old Victorian mansion blocks with the old rickety lifts inside, the caged lifts. It was taken up to a third or fourth floor, I can't exactly remember. And I found the door, and there was this notice alongside the door, which basically said, if you're not expected here, if you don't have an appointment, if you don't know anybody that lives in this house, do not ring this doorbell. it was what we said what we would describe in those days, a message that really vibed you out. It was like, do not ring this doorbell. So there was I with this package, and I had to deliver it to this dress. So I rang the doorbell, and I waited, and the door opened, and there was Jimi Hendrix. And I said, I have a package for you. He said, come in. And he took the package, and he said, do you want a cup of tea? This was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was at his flat on his own. So I sat down in his living room, and he went up and came back and made a cup of tea. I had seen him play at the Marquee Club. I'd seen him 2 or 3 times, so obviously I knew who he was. He was a very shy, very quiet, lovely man. And one of the highlights at the time, I was excited by the fact that I had met him.
Yeah.
It became even more significant given that he died not too long after that.
Oh, wow. Oh, God, that's incredible. I really don't think anyone else could say they delivered a package and then had tea with Jimi Hendrix, who wrote a note that vibed them out. If we have time, I actually would love to learn some more lexicon from that era. I like the vibe out a lot. So I heard a story through the grapevine that you were actually able to hear a first look at some musicians' work.
Yeah. I mean, there was back in those days, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was much more openness between musicians. The whole sort of jamming scene at clubs was actually led by Jimi Hendrix. He really brought that from America into London, and so there were various clubs like the Speakeasy and the Revolution where various artists would get up and jam at the end of the night. I remember being involved or being present at the Apple's music studios, their offices rather than their studios. And I can't even remember what I was doing there at the time, but this very tall American gentleman came up to me and said, have you got time to listen to my white pressing, which was a pressing basically comes straight from the studio. So we went up found a small room, and there was one of the old-fashioned record players sitting on a table in the corner, and we sat down. He introduced himself, and I had no idea who he was. And he played the record, and it was very nice. I was very polite about it.
Did you like it?
Sorry? Well, it was the first listening, and I sometimes need 2 or 3 listens to really get into it. But it was only later on did I discover that it was James Taylor, whose first album was actually recorded at the Apple Studios.
Was it?
But even more exciting for me was, again, being up at Essex Music Publishers in Oxford Street, when a guy called Tony Visconti came into the office, and he was a producer and a manager, and he said, would you like to hear this cut that's just come straight from the studio? So yes, and so went in again, sat down, put the record on, and he put this record on, and within 10 seconds I was lifting my jaw off the ground, and it was Joe Cocker's With a Little Help from My Friends.
No.
And so I must have been the very first person outside of the recording studio who'd actually heard it. Obviously, all the people that were in the studio that day, were involved in making it and recording it. But then for it to be brought up to the publishers and get to listen to it, and I knew instantly that this was a record that would last forever. It's just the most incredibly exciting version. And so that was, I suppose, one of the other, probably one of those that you're referring to.
Do you're just as Forrest Gump was always in the right place in history at the right time. I feel like you have that luck for music. Those are some incredible moments.
I think if you speak to a lot of people, other musicians that were around in that era, they would have similar stories to tell, because it was just the day to day. Nobody would have any real understanding or recognition that at some point, many years later, what those perhaps incidental things actually came to signify to you.
Wow. Did you have a favorite? Did you have someone that you really were excited to meet? I mean, all those people are so exciting, but was there a couple in particular for you that were your heroes?
Um, well, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys,
Mm-hmm.
I met when we were performing in Anaheim in California. He came backstage. We were supporting a band called Three Dog Night,
Yeah.
and Brian basically had come down um, to was backstage during the show and came into the dressing room and was introduced to us and shook his
Oh,
hand, and we were sort of dumbstruck really to be in the presence of characters even then of his stature.
that is wonderful. And then last question before we kind of move on to young musicians a bit. It must be, I can imagine it must be so frustrating. Everyone wants to know about your music days and your very worthy charities and events afterwards are probably worthy of storytelling too. But for some reason, the glitz and the glamour of the music is so
Uh,
exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about being on the road? That is a totally weird universe in itself
yeah,
on tour buses. Did you
yeah.
like being on stage? Did you like schlepping stuff from one place to another?
We loved it. I mean, it beat working. I mean, um, that's the way we all looked upon it in those days. Uh, it's the camaraderie of being within a close knit group that literally travels from city to city, town to town. I did the first States tour with Uriah Heep, and with Cressida we toured with bands like Black Sabbath and various other Vertigo artists. And it was a great deal of fun. Um, it was hard work, but
Yeah.
even when you were tired, it was a sort of a tiredness that was, that was a pleasurable tiredness, if you like. And you never knew what was going to be happening next. So, going out on stage each night and playing to the audience and getting a reaction to the music you're playing was really quite, it was very rewarding.
I mean, Uriah Heep's music, you have to be so in tune with each other, my guess is, and listening to each other and playing. Did you practice a lot? Did you have synergy in the band and it kind of just worked?
Yes, I mean, I was only with the band for about 18 months during
Yeah.
for their third album. And so to some extent, when you join a band that's already been going, the first thing you have to do is to learn all the numbers
Yes.
that they've previously been playing and recording and performing on stage. And of course, then whoever follows you has to do the same for the numbers that you created and so on. I mean, the question about synergy, I mean, I think all the best bands have that kind of chemistry between the musicians. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. On the other hand, it all contributes to making the music what it is. Um, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can we talk to about why it is important before we go back into the fund to help young musicians, especially at that critical time in their career?
I think in many ways, young musicians today, have a plethora of um, teaching materials, videos, online tutorials to enable them to develop their own skills on their instruments. I think what's still lacking, if you like, is how you take that and you apply that in, if you're one playing in a band, into a group setting. Um, and that is something that you kind of learn from experience, but it can also, to some extent, you can guide people as to how to approach your particular role within a particular number or song as the musician, whether you're taking a lead role in it or whether you're sitting at the back just maintaining the tempo. Um, uh, and those things you can only get from experience. The problem with a lot of young people in the Highlands of Scotland is there's less opportunities to get that. Um, Basically, traditionally, musicians have had to leave the Highlands to go south, usually to London, if they want to make it within the music industry. Um, But I think given, the current situation with COVID and so forth, and the lockdowns and the extended restrictions, a lot of young musicians are just not getting any opportunity. And this has now been going on for a long time and is likely to carry on for a little while yet. Yeah.
So in that light, how does a layman like me become supportive of the fund? How do we get involved, and what's happening? I think on Tuesday, you said.
Well, it's the official launch of the fund on Tuesday. We were due to launch in March this year. We were almost ready to launch, just before the beginning of March. And clearly with COVID, everything was put on hold. There were huge delays in getting formal recognition as a charity because the organisations, like the Scottish charity regulators, they were all in furlough. They were working with much longer timescales. So it wasn't really until the end of September that we finally got a formal recognition. We didn't want to launch before we had received that, and that's why we're launching next week. It'll be a virtual launch, so no surprise there. But on Tuesday, we will be launching a website, or Facebook page.
So Tuesday, in case people don't know when this video is coming out, what date
That's
is
Tuesday,
that?
the 13th of October.
Great, the 13th. Lucky 13, that's good.
Yeah, indeed.
That's fantastic. So we can get involved on Facebook. We'll include the link below.
Yep.
And there'll be videos to share, I'm assuming. I saw that 2 prizes might be created.
Well, one of the things that we've to some extent already got involved in is taking on the work that Liam's parents, Brian and Patricia, had done in setting up a fund with the UHI, where Liam had got his music degree, which is an annual scholarship award, if you like, one for songwriting and one for production. And it's a smallish grant, but it enables the winners to go away and get additional support, tutor, and so forth. So that has been going for the last 2 or 3 years now, but that's now going to be, if you like, incorporated into the fund's activities, and hopefully we can expand that. There will clearly be growing opportunities for partnering with the UHI. So, for example, the fund is releasing a single from the album, the Twisted Blues album that we've donated to the fund. And that's coming out at the beginning of November, that single. But the UHI, one of their students, has been making a music video for the single. Sarah, she's Hungarian. She's back in Hungary. So we are doing all the liaison over, producing the video via Teams, and meet with her on a weekly basis while she basically develops that. There is another student that we're mentoring and working with on music marketing, so taking the single and putting in social media campaign, and that's going to kick off very shortly. So the relationship with the UHI has become really quite central to some of the work that we're doing, and we're already talking about other things that maybe we can get involved in.
That's so exciting. Iain, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your stories, letting us know a little bit about the fund, which I'm very excited about. And again, we'll include the links below so that people can get involved, and take care during this wild time. I hope to see you perform one day, maybe online for all of us in lockdown. That would be really fun. Take care, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jess.